Horror stories and movies have been a part of human culture for centuries, with tales of monsters, ghosts, and supernatural beings inspiring fear and fascination in people around the world. The history of horror is a rich and varied one, encompassing everything from ancient folk tales to modern blockbuster films. In this article, we will explore the origins and evolution of horror stories and movies, tracing their development from ancient times to the present day. Origins of horror. The roots of horror can be traced back to the earliest human societies, where tales of supernatural beings and frightening creatures were used to explain the world around them. In ancient Greece, stories of gods and monsters were told to explain natural phenomena such as thunder and lightning. The Greek poet Hesiod's Theogony is one of the earliest examples of this kind of horror story, with its descriptions of the monstrous titans and their battles with the gods. In medieval Europe, horror stories took on a more religious tone, with tales of demons, witches, and other supernatural creatures used to reinforce the power of the church. The most famous example of this type of horror is the story of Dracula, which was first published in 1897 by the Irish author Bram Stoker. The novel tells the story of a vampire who preys on innocent victims, and has since become a classic of the horror genre. The birth of horror cinema. The 20th century saw the birth of horror cinema, with filmmakers using the medium to bring their terrifying visions to life. The first horror film is generally considered to be The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a German silent film directed by Robert Wiene and released in 1920. The film tells the story of a hypnotist who uses a somnambulist to commit murders, and its surreal imagery and distorted sets made it a landmark in the history of cinema. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, horror films continued to be popular, with classics such as Frankenstein, 1931, and Dracula, 1931, setting the standard for the genre. These films often featured iconic monsters such as the Wolfman, the Mummy, and the creature from the Black Lagoon, and they established many of the conventions that still define horror films today. The Golden Age of Horror. The 1950s and 1960s are often referred to as the Golden Age of Horror, with filmmakers using new technologies and techniques to create increasingly terrifying films. The rise of science fiction and space exploration inspired a new generation of horror films, with classics such as The Blob, 1958, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956, exploring the idea of alien invaders and body horror. The 1960s also saw the rise of a new type of horror film, one that explored social and cultural anxieties rather than supernatural terrors. Films such as Psycho, 1960, and Night of the Living Dead, 1968, explored themes of isolation, paranoia, and the breakdown of social order, and their influence can still be seen in horror films today. Modern horror. The 1970s and 1980s saw the rise of a new generation of horror filmmakers, who used the genre to explore issues of sexuality, gender, and identity. Films such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, and Halloween, 1978, established the slasher film as a popular subgenre, while films like The Exorcist, 1973, and Rosemary's Baby, 1968, explored themes of demonic possession and maternal anxiety. In the 1990s and 2000s, horror films became increasingly self-aware, with filmmakers using